Happen Pharmaceuticals in association with Higher Secondary Principals Forum.
A very warm welcome to all of you for this Prudent Scholars Political Science class. Myself, Swapnil Naik, teaching Political Science in Srimati Chandrabhaga Tukoba Naik High Secondary, Curchorem, Goa. And today I'll be discussing a topic from book 2, that is Politics in India since Independence. And the chapter which I'm going to deal is chapter number 6, that is the Crisis of Democratic Order. Now in the previous chapter, in the chapter number 5, that is Challenges to and Restoration of Congress System, you have already seen or you have already listened to the earlier teacher who have discussed about the various challenges faced by Congress right from 1967 onwards, okay, in which you have seen a political succession of a short period of time wherein 3 different prime ministers change. Later on also you have seen about the crisis which took place within the Congress party, the split in Congress party. And also there was this problem with the presidential election and later on the 1971 election. In this particular chapter, the chapter which I am taking, chapter number 6, the Crisis of Democratic Order, I will be dealing with mainly the topics which are displayed right in front of you. The topic I am starting with background of emergency, the economic context, the Gujarat and Bihar movement. Then there was some conflict with the judicial system. Then I'll come to the very main topic here, that is conflict with judiciary. After that, the declaration of emergency, the consequences of emergency, the lessons what we have learned from the emergency, and lastly the politics after emergency. So let me start just giving the background to emergency. Means what exactly was the picture behind this emergency, before this emergency. Okay. So the very first thing what I want to tell you here is the number of changes taking place in Indian politics since 1967. Number of changes, as I have already told you, and you have already learned this in previous chapter, where you discuss about the political succession, the sudden change, okay, as well as the split in Congress. And that is what I am talking about here, that is number of changes in Indian politics since 1967. Next, if you look at Indira Gandhi emerged as a towering leader with tremendous popularity. So since 1967, after Indira Gandhi became Prime Minister of India, she became a tremendous leader, okay, a towering leader with tremendous popularity. Then there was also this party competition which became bitter and polarized. There was a very tough fight between different political parties in the same political party which got splitted, the split of Congress. And there was a very tough competition among these different political parties during this particular phase. There was also the tension in relationship between the government and the judicial system. The Supreme Court found many initiatives of the government to be violative of the Constitution. And this is where I am talking about the tension in the relationship between the government and the judicial system. Then the Congress alleged that the court was a conservative institution. Now here the Congress party have alleged the judicial system being a conservative institution, okay, not giving them chance to implement pro-poor welfare programs. Then the opposition parties also felt that politics was becoming too personalized. Now here the political parties, mainly the opposition parties, has accused the ruling party or the government during that particular time that they were becoming too personalized, okay, looking at their own personal interest. Okay. So if we look at the background to the emergency, this is all what we have seen in the first phase, okay, before the imposition of emergency in India. Okay, starting with the number of changes which started taking place in the Indian politics since 1967, then the tremendous popularity of Indira Gandhi, the party became polarized, okay, there was a very tough competition among those different political parties, okay, and that was just a background what I am giving you of knowing about emergency. Now, let me talk about the economic context. What was India's condition during the economic condition before the imposition of the emergency? Now, if you look at this, you have already seen 1967, the 4th general election, and soon after that the 1971 election. And during this period, there were a lot of issues, there were a lot of crises which India have faced. Okay? And that is what I am going to tell you about the economic context, the economic background of India before the imposition of emergency. So, here if you see the Congress slogan of Garibi Hatao did not improve the social and economic condition in country after 1971-72. So, the 1971 election which was held in India with the very main slogan of the Congress, that is, they focused on Garibi Hatao, where they focused on the pro-poor policies. But even after having so many policies for the upliftment of the poor people, it did not go well. Okay? And that is where we say here that there was no improvement in the social and economic condition even after the great slogan what was given during that particular phase, that is Garibi Hatao. Then also India have faced one of the biggest challenge during this particular period, and that was the Bangladesh crisis, which had put a heavy strain on India's economy. Now, you have already covered this, but again I am telling you here, in 1971, there was this Bangladesh crisis, and because of this Bangladesh crisis, nearly 80 million people from Bangladesh, they migrated to India, and that have actually put a strain on Indian resources. And the quarrel between the East Pakistan and West Pakistan also have made a problem for India. Now, India fought a war against Pakistan, okay, and liberated Bangladesh. Okay, that is the East Pakistan which got free from the Pakistan. Okay, and that actually have put a strain on India's economy, because whatever the resources what India had, we have spent much of the resources on fighting the war, that is with Pakistan. Then also there was all round increase in oil prices and increase in the prices of commodities. There was high inflation during this particular phase. Okay, many different policies which were formulated by government, they failed, and thereby it leading to the increases in the prices of oil as well as the prices of all other commodities are concerned. Prices increased from 23% in 1973 and 30% in 1974. Okay, and that was one of the greatest challenge what India faced to the economy of our country. Then the industrial growth was also low, and there was high unemployment rate. The unemployment rate was also very high. Okay, many of the people, many of the employers, okay, what they have done is they have cut down the expenditure. Okay, they have cut down the salaries of the employees, and that caused dissatisfaction among the people. Which caused dissatisfaction among the people here. Then also there was another particular issue. We all know that India's economy is based on agriculture. Agriculture is considered as the backbone of our Indian economy. But what we have seen, there was a sudden decline in the agriculture productivity in India, and this decline in the agriculture productivity has led to severe problem, and it was basically because of failure of monsoon in the year 1972-73, which ultimately led to the decline in agriculture productivity here. Then also very important part to this emergency situation, okay, was the student unrest and protests were effective. Okay, the student protest movements were very effective during this particular phase. Students from different areas, different regions of the country started protest against the government because of corruption, because of unemployment, because of the rise in the oil prices or the rise in the prices of all the commodities, and so on. Okay? So basically what we have looked in this particular slide is more about the economy of India before the imposition of the emergency, right. So, let me go to the next topic here, next subtopic. In my next slide, I will be talking about the Gujarat and Bihar movement. Okay. And in this particular slide, what we are discussing here is more about the student protest in Gujarat and Bihar, both of which were Congress ruled states. Now, here in this particular phase, we mostly know most of the Indian states, they were under the rule of Congress, and it was during this particular phase many of the students organization, many of the students, they organized themselves and they started protest against the Congress government, especially in the state of Gujarat and in Bihar. And the impact was on the politics of the two states as well as on the national politics. So, the impact of this students movement was not only on the state, but at a larger context it was even on the national politics. Okay. So, let me take the first one here, that is Gujarat movement. Let me tell you something about the Gujarat movement specifically, and then I will move to the Bihar movement here. So, it was in January 1974, students in Gujarat started an agitation against the rising prices of food grains, cooking oil and other essential commodities. Now, here the movement started by students. It was in January 1974. And why these students started a protest, why these students started this agitation? Basically, because of the rising prices of food grains, cooking oil and other essential commodities. And the agitation was also against corruption. Now, we all know that corruption is one of the biggest challenge which any country faces. And in India also we are facing this particular problem of corruption. So, in 1974, when the students started this protest, it was also against corruption. It was not just the rising food grains, prices of food grains, cooking oil or the other commodities, but also about corruption. Okay. And student protest led to imposition of president rule in the state. Okay, that is very important to know about the president rule. Okay. So, after this protest started in the state of Gujarat in 1974, the state was under president rule, and Morarji Desai from Congress O announced indefinite fast if fresh elections were not held. So, Morarji Desai, one of the greatest leader, okay, he demanded for fresh election in the state of Gujarat. Otherwise, he said that he will go for indefinite fast. And in June 1975, the state election held in Gujarat, thereby defeating Congress. So, in June 1975, the state's elections were held in Gujarat and thereby defeating the Congress in Gujarat. Okay, so that was about the Gujarat movement, which was started in the year 1974, and it was a protest movement which was started by the students, basically against the rising prices of food grains, cooking oil and other essential commodities, as well as the most important was agitation was against corruption. And here in this particular movement, okay, it was Morarji Desai, okay, who demanded to have indefinite fast and to have fresh election. And when the elections was held in June 1975, it was a clear-cut defeat for Congress party in Gujarat. Okay. In my next slide, I will discuss about the Bihar movement. Both the movements started by students only, but very well important to know about the difference about the two movements. Okay. So, it was in March 1974, as we have already discussed about Gujarat movement, that was in January, but here about the Bihar movement, it was in March 1974, where students came together in Bihar to protest against rising prices, food scarcity, unemployment and corruption. So, some more topics here wherein the students started to protest, and the protest was basically against the rising prices, the food scarcity, the unemployment as well as the problem of corruption, what we have seen. In this particular movement, in Bihar movement, Jaiprakash Narayan was invited and led the students movement. So, a socialist Jayaprakash Narayan, he was invited to join this particular movement, okay, and led the students movement in Bihar. And J.P. Narayan demanded dismissal of the Congress in Bihar and called for total revolution in social, economic and political sphere, wherein he demanded through this total revolution for true democracy, okay, and he demanded the dismissal of Congress party from Bihar, because it was alleged that this particular party could not control the rising prices, they could not solve the problem of food security, they could not overcome the problem of unemployment, as well as there was this problem of corruption. And J.P. Narayan demanded the dismissal of Congress in Bihar in this particular year. And it was carried out by a series of burns, gheraos and strike which were organized in protesting against the Bihar government. So, students have used some instrument in this particular movement, and they have used movements such some instruments such as burns, okay, gherao as well as strike all over the state. Okay. So, this was the Bihar movement which started in the year 1974, and this Bihar movement, when J.P. Narayan or Jayaprakash Narayan, when he took over this particular movement, he said that it should not only remain to Bihar, but it should move to other parts of the country as well. Okay. He talked about the movement which should go for at the national level. Okay. So, that is about the Bihar movement. Then during this particular phase, before the imposition of emergency, again there was little confusion, or there was a conflict with the judicial system. And let us look at what was that conflict with the judicial system during this particular phase. Now, the period when the government ruling party had differences with the judiciary, and the conflict was between the legislature and the judicial branch here. Now, let me tell you about this particular crisis, wherein the period, okay, what I am talking about, where the ruling party had a differences with the judicial system, and there were number of issues on which this particular meaning the ruling government had differences with the judicial system. That is, the parliament abridged the fundamental rights. That was a question what was asked, and the Supreme Court said no, the parliament cannot do it. Then also there was another question where they asked that can the parliament curtail the right to property by making any amendment. Again here the Supreme Court said no, the parliament cannot. Okay, and because of that there was a lot of differences, okay, between the legislature and between the judicial system. That was one. Then that is where what I have talked about, the issues related to constitutional amendment and its interpretations were debated during this particular phase. Then in 1973, the issue of appointment of Chief Justice of India worsened the condition. Now, this was also one another controversial issue with the judicial system. Sidelining the first three senior judges, the government appointed the fourth person, and that particular appointment was politically controversial appointment of the Chief Justice of India, okay, in which the government set aside the seniority of three judges and appointed Justice A. N. Ray as the Chief Justice of India, and that was considered as one of the most controversial appointment in the Indian judicial system, and that is where I am talking about the conflict with the judicial system. Okay. So, that was also another issue before the imposition of the emergency in India. Before the and this is all what I am talking about, the crisis in democratic order. The democracy which gives all the freedom, all the rights to the people was under certain crisis, and we have seen in the first place where I have told you about the 1967 election, and after that the number of issues started in this democratic process. Then the economic conditions of India started declining because of several reasons. Okay, because of the food crisis, because of the war with Pakistan, because of all other issues. And also I have told you about the conflict with the judiciary, that is the conflict between the legislature and the judicial branch of the government. Now, let me take you to the very main topic here about the political crisis, what I am talking about, the picture what you can see on your screen here. Okay, it is which you can also check in your text, okay, which is given in your textbook here. Now, let me come to this particular topic on declaration of emergency, how the emergency was declared in India. But before that, I will just tell you about emergency. Now, emergency is a situation which arises in any particular nation, in any particular country. And in India, there are certain constitutional provisions we have related to the emergency. So, there are 3 different articles which I will tell you here about the emergency provisions in our Indian constitution. Article 352, Article 352 for national emergency, for imposition of national emergency. Article 356 which is for state emergency, and Article 360 which is for financial emergency. Okay. And under these three provisions, emergency can be imposed in India. And today what I am going to talk about is the declaration of emergency, and I am focusing on Article 352, that is the imposition of national emergency. Now, it was on 12th June 1975, Justice Jagmohan Lal Sinha of the Allahabad High Court passed a judgment declaring Indira Gandhi's election to the Lok Sabha as invalid. When Indira Gandhi was elected in the year 1971 to the Lok Sabha, there was a petition which was filed against her candidature. She was accused of using the government machinery for contesting the election, for winning the election. And a petition was filed, and when the petition, the judgment was given on that particular petition which was filed by Raj Narayan, a socialist and a candidate who contested against Indira Gandhi in 1971 election, and the petition was given a judgment by Justice Jagmohan Lal Sinha of the Allahabad High Court, and he passed a judgment declaring Indira Gandhi's election to the Lok Sabha as invalid. And on 24th June, the Supreme Court granted her partial stay on High Court order. So, after Indira Gandhi's election was declared as invalid, what she did was that she went to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court partially granted her stay on the High Court order. Okay, and when she was granted the stay for that particular period, okay, she could she in that particular phase have taken that particular chance here, and on 25th of June 1975, the government declared threat of internal disturbances and therefore invoked Article 352 of the Constitution. Okay. So, after Indira Gandhi got a chance to stay for a particular period, okay, what had happened was on 25th of June, on the midnight of 25th of June 1975, the government declared a threat to internal disturbance and therefore invoke Article 352 of the Constitution, and the government under the provision could declare a state of emergency. Okay. And on the night of 25th June 1975, the Prime Minister recommended imposition of emergency to the then President of India, President Fakhruddin Ali Ahmed. Okay. So, it was recommended by the Prime Minister, okay, the government in the midnight of 25th June to impose the national emergency to the President of India, and the President was President Fakhruddin Ali Ahmed. Okay. And after that, the President imposed the national emergency in India on the midnight of 25th June 1975. And the same thing, the cabinet was informed about the emergency at a special meeting at 6 a.m. on 26th June after all this happened. So, about this particular declaration of emergency was known to the other members of the parliament, the cabinet, okay, on the next day, that was on 26th June, that too at 6 a.m. Okay, after all these things happened. So, here the emergency was declared on 25th of June 1975, and it was on the recommendation of Prime Minister, and the Prime Minister at that time was Indira Gandhi, and she recommended it to the President Fakhruddin Ali Ahmed, and he imposed on the emergency on the midnight of 25th of June 1975. Okay. So, this was the emergency period, and the picture behind will show you about the emergency period here. Okay. So, the emergency in India started from 26th of June, that is 1975, ended on 21st of March 1977. So, the emergency period, it was a period of altogether 21 months, starting from June 1975, ended in March 1977. So, this was a period what we have seen for the very first time the national emergencies were imposed under Article 352 for the very first time. Now, let me take you to the consequence part of this emergency, the effects what we have seen in the Indian society, on the Indian politicians, on the Indian economy and so on. So, let me talk about the consequences of emergency here, and to tell you about the consequences, there were several consequences what the country have faced. Okay, and the first very important consequence of the declaration of emergency was the agitations were abruptly stopped. You all know that when the emergency was imposed, before that there were number of agitation, there were number of protest movements which were started by different leaders all over the world. Different students were also involved, and all these agitations, all these protest movements were abruptly stopped. All of a sudden, after the imposition of emergency, all this agitation, all this protest movement, all these strikes were stopped by the government after the declaration of emergency. So, as I have said, consequence of emergency, and in which agitations were abruptly stopped, where many political leaders, okay, and especially the opposition leaders were put up in jail because they were protesting against the government decisions, and that is what made the government to send all of the leaders and most of the political leaders to jail. And also important, during the emergency period, the government suspended the freedom of press, which is one important tool in the hands of the people in any democracy. But when the emergencies were imposed, there are so many restrictions which comes with it. And another important problem what was faced by government suspended the freedom of press, where the newspapers were asked to get prior permission, prior approval from the government to publish any material, and this is what we know about press censorship. So, during this particular phase, the government suspended the freedom of press, and that is what we know about the press censorship. Even many of the newspapers, many of the magazines started printing the magazines or the newspapers, okay, with blank spaces, where the government have given where the government have not given them the permission to print it. Then the government banned many organizations, and organizations like Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh (RSS) and Jamaat-e-Islami were also banned, basically apprehending the social and communal disharmony. So, government have taken major steps in banning many of the organizations. It includes Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, that is RSS, and also another, that is Jamaat-e-Islami. Then, under the provision of emergency, the fundamental rights of citizens were also suspended. Now, this is one constitutional right which is given to every individual in India, every citizen of India. But when the emergencies were imposed, the government, under the provision of emergency, also suspended the fundamental rights, and the government also made it sure that the fundamental rights cannot be challenged even in the Supreme Court, okay, because of the emergency which was imposed. And also very important, the government made extensive use of preventive detention. Now, this is one particular provision what we have in the Indian Constitution, okay, and the government have made extensive use of preventive detention. And what is this preventive detention now? It is nothing but a particular law what we have, where people are arrested. People can be arrested and they can be detained, not because they have committed any crime, but before they commit any crime, people will be detained or arrested here, and that is what we know about preventive detention. Before any person commit any crime, the person will be detained, person will be arrested, Okay, and that is what we know here as preventive detention, and that was extensively was used by the government during the period of emergency in India, and that is one of the consequence what we have seen as far as the emergency is concerned. Then the parliament also brought many changes to the constitution. There were so many amendments which were passed during this particular phase. Okay, and one of the important constitutional amendment which was passed was, so the 42nd constitutional amendment was also passed during the emergency period, that was in 1976. The duration of the legislature in the country was extended from 5 years to 6 years. That was also another major change what was brought by the emergency in India, and that was also another consequence what we have seen in the Indian political system, and that was more towards the crisis situation what was seen in the Indian democracy. Okay. Now, this image will show you, this is a newspaper clipping what we have, which shows that the president proclaimed national emergency, okay, giving a reason saying that security of India was threatened by internal disturbances. The reason what was given saying that internal disturbances, okay, there was a threat to the India. Okay, and basically this preventive arrest, press censorship and all that, it was all happened during the emergency period. Now, this image I have shown just to give you the reflections about the situation during the period of emergency. After discussing about the consequence of emergency, let me just tell you something more about the lessons what we have learned out of emergency. What are the lessons what we have learned? Now, you know, for anything there is a consequence, and also when we face any consequence, we learn many things from that. And in India also we have learned number of things as far as because of the imposition of emergency. Now, the emergency brought out both the weaknesses and the strengths in the Indian democratic system. Now, let us just look at what are those weaknesses, what are the strengths, what we have seen as far as during the emergency period. One lesson of emergency is that it was felt that it was extremely difficult to do away with the democracy in India. So, one of the lessons what we have seen, though there were number of agitation, number of problems what we have seen in the Indian system, in the Indian democratic system during the emergency time, it was very much felt that it is very difficult to do away with the democratic system in India. Okay, so that was one of the important lessons what we have learned out of this emergency in India, that is one. Secondly, it brought out some ambiguities regarding the emergency provision in the constitution. Now, this ambiguities what I am talking about, mainly the problem, the issues in the Indian constitution, the provisions of emergency, how we can go about imposition of emergency, what are the ways why we can impose emergency, and there were several other issues, okay, which made it difficult to understand, and that is why it is said that it brought out some ambiguities regarding the emergency provisions in the Indian constitution. Then also the emergency made everyone more aware about the value of civil liberties. I have already told you that there were a number of restrictions which are put up on individual freedom. There was no freedom of press, fundamental rights were suspended during the time of emergency, and that is what I am talking about. The emergency made everyone more aware about the values of civil liberties, which are important to every individual, which are important to every citizen in the democratic system. And the court too have taken an active role after the emergency protecting the civil liberties. So, the judiciary, the court become also very active, okay, in protecting the rights, the liberties, the civil liberties of every individual after emergency was over. So, what we know today that the emergency has given a lesson where it has shown us the crisis situation, where it has shown us the weaknesses as well as the strength of the Indian democracy. And here if we look at that, it is said that it was very difficult for any country, any person to say that it is very difficult for anybody to say that India would do away with the system of democracy. So, that was one. Then also it brought out some ambiguities regarding the emergency provision in the constitution of our country. Then it made everyone more aware about their civil liberties, as well as the court became active in protecting the civil liberties of every individual there. Okay, and that is what we have learned. That is a lesson what we have received after the imposition of national emergency. Okay, and lastly, this is the last ending topic which I would like to conclude with, the last remaining subtopic, that is politics after emergency. Means how there was a transition in the political situation. What was the political situation after 1977? Okay, after lifting the emergency from India. And if you see, after the emergency was over, the Lok Sabha elections were announced. So remember, I have already told you the emergencies got over in March 1977, and after the emergencies were over, the Lok Sabha elections were announced. Okay, and in 1977, the election turned into a referendum on the experience of the emergency. So it was just like a referendum, because people have learned so many things during the emergency period. And when the elections were declared in the year 1977, okay, it was a referendum on the experience of emergency. Then the opposition fought the election on the slogan "Save Democracy." You remember the slogan what was given in 1971, which was on Garibi Hatao. But after the imposition of emergency, people learned so many things regarding the democratic system, the rights, the freedoms, and so on. And the opposition, they fought the election of 1977 with the slogan called "Save Democracy." Okay? And the people's verdict was decisively against emergency. So the people gave a verdict. The electoral verdict of 1977 election was against emergency. Okay, for the very first time since independence, the Congress party was defeated in the Lok Sabha election. So the thing what I am talking about, the decisive verdict, is nothing but for the very first time since independence, the Congress party was defeated in the Lok Sabha elections, thereby giving a chance to a new party to come into power. The Congress could win only 154 seats out of 542, whereas the Janata Party and its allies won nearly 330 seats out of 542 seats in the Lok Sabha. And the Janata Party itself won 295 seats, thereby declaring Morarji Desai as the Prime Minister of India after the 1977 election. So that was the politics after emergency. That is the elections which was held in 1977 and giving a clear-cut verdict in the favor of another party, that is Janata Party, okay, declaring as a winner with total 295 seats, along with its allies combining together 330 seats out of 542. And it was a defeat for the Indian National Congress with just 154 seats. Okay. So this is the last topic, last subtopic in this particular chapter, that is the crisis of democratic order. So let me just give you gist of what we have covered today in this particular chapter. So today in this particular chapter, I have covered the topic on the background to emergency, then the economic context, how India have faced the economic problems, okay, the decline in the Indian economy. Then I have also told you about the Gujarat and Bihar movement, how the students have protested and how the protests have turned them to fight against the injustice which was done. Then there was also this conflict with the judicial system, the declaration of emergency, the main very important part what we have discussed today, 1975 to 1977, the period of 21 months, the period what we call as the darkest hour in the Indian democratic system, the consequences of emergency and the lessons what we have learned from the emergency, and lastly the politics after emergency. Okay, so these are all the subtopics what we have learned in this particular chapter, that is the crisis of democratic order. So let me finish. Let me thank all of you for giving me this opportunity to reach out to all the students. Thank you one and all.
Prudent Scholars, powered by Lupin Pharmaceuticals.
अब आपकी सुरक्षा आपके हाथों में। ल्यूपी सेफ हैंड सैनिटाइजर, आपका और चेन्नई सुपर किंग्स का फर्स्ट लाइन ऑफ डिफेंस। अब आपकी सुरक्षा आपके हाथों में। ल्यूपी सेफ हैंड सैनिटाइजर, आपका और चेन्नई सुपर किंग्स का फर्स्ट लाइन ऑफ डिफेंस। अब आपकी सुरक्षा आपके हाथों में। ल्यूपी सेफ हैंड सैनिटाइजर, आपका और चेन्नई सुपर किंग्स का फर्स्ट लाइन ऑफ डिफेंस।